Greg Byrne and Will Levy and Leanne and Robert here at the studios at Lansan Plaza. So welcome to our RAD Live Q A for September 12th. As with other Q&A sessions, we'll take any questions people have and go through them. But the first thing we'll do today is we're going to feature a new tool that we just posted onto the website, and it's called the Maximum Supportable First Mortgage Summary Tool, or in parens, the Summary Tool. And it gives you a little snapshot of it, but we'll actually go through it. Next week's call, we were going to do on today's call, we were going to feature, we've made some revisions to the RAD inventory, the basic tool that that's been out there for about a year that that people are using to sort of project the feasibility of RAD at any one particular property. But we're just about ready to publish it, and we just felt that we wanted to take a couple more days to just test it out a little bit more. So we're going to do it next Thursday. And next Thursday, when we go through the tool, what it has is it has additional sort of flexibilities on the initial global assumptions screen that you can enter. It also allows you different debt sizing options if you want to use debt coverage ratio or if you want to use loan to value. But most importantly, what the revised tool does is it gives you a sort of a more user-friendly feature on how to estimate the value of if you want to combine RAD with 4% or 9% tax credit. So it both includes more data, explains a little bit more about the assumptions behind raising equity to the tax credit program, and so it's a nice real enhancement to the inventory tool. So, but anyway, sorry we don't have it today, but we'll have it for next week's call, and we'll preview it then. Okay. So the summary tool, we'll take about 5 or 10 minutes to go through the summary tool. And one of the things that PHAs and lenders and field office directors and SMEs and all that have asked is that is there any way we can do a run that we can see how the feasibility or how much mortgage, first mortgage debt can be generated across PHAs or across portfolios, because the RAD inventory tool is really sort of intended to look at project by project or just within a particular PHA. And if people wanted to run some what-if scenarios across and see the results across a larger inventory. So the tool wasn't really designed for that. So what this does is this does that second level. It allows you to sort of preview, using various assumptions, what it would look like across PHAs altogether. So, and it's, as you'll see in a moment, it's loaded with a bunch of beginning assumptions, all of which can be modified by the user, and you can decide to review the results at a particular PHA or by all PHAs. So with that as a promo, and also to announce Jay Wright from C. Ray Baker Associates, which is our one of our technical assistance contractors on RAD, is also on the call, and Jay is essentially the architect behind this tool. So Jay will also sort of participate in any questions and discussions. So we're going to now turn to the tool. We'll show you how the tool works. Yeah. So yeah, go to the. First of all, we'll show you on the website where you can find it. It's right there on our website where the second option is, of course, the RAD, the basic inventory tool. See the second right there. And then the fourth option now under the tools is the RAD Maximum Supportable First Mortgage Summary Tool, and that's this new tool. So we'll then go to that. And then when you go to that, the first thing shows up is the instructions with a bunch of disclaimers. And so what it's asking you to do is accept the disclaimers, and then you can see the rest of the tool. So we'll accept the disclaimers, and we'll assume that you have read the instructions. So we'll pass on that. But actually, before we do pass, go down a little bit further, Leanne, and down a little bit further. In there's a discussion of the difference between sizing a mortgage based on loan to value versus sizing a mortgage under debt service coverage ratio. And this tool sort of uses debt service coverage ratio as a way of sizing the mortgage, which is largely consistent with the FHA 221D4 program. If you're a private lender, If you are using the 223F program, it's often the lower of DSCR or loan to value. So I won't go over the difference between what these two different models are for sizing loans, but only to say the instructions give a little primer on that, and the way the tool is designed is it's designed along the debt service coverage method, which is again consistent with the FHA 221D4 program. Okay, so now we'll go over to the Assumptions tab, and what you see is familiar with those with our inventory assessment tool that you have these sort of larger sort of buttons, radio buttons you can select, and the one at the top says you can either select your own particular PHA, you can list from PHAs there, or if you just leave it blank or the very last selection is blank, then you'll get a summary or you get results across all the public housing. So we'll just keep it as blank, and then you see here say, okay, just like with the summary tool, there's a bunch of assumptions. So it starts off with these assumptions: 3% vacancy loss, 2% bad debt, 120 other income per unit per year, and you can choose to modify all those or run the analysis using these assumptions. You'll notice that the interest rate we've put in there is 4.25% and a 0.45 mortgage insurance premium. So that is largely consistent with what if you do a D4 today in today's market. It's a good percentage point higher than it was 3 or 4 months ago. But if you don't do FHA insurance, it could be a different rate. But anyway, use whatever assumptions you want. And so with those assumptions there, you can either, if we had already sort of chosen something else, we can update or we can restore. But we'll come back to that. Let's just go to the assumptions, to the results tab. So with those assumptions already loaded, what this tool does is that it essentially gives you a bunch of summary results across the public housing portfolio. And one of those summary results, so it's done by state, alphabetically by state, and then within each state, whether it goes by PHA code. So Alaska happens to only have one PHA in the state, so it's AK001. If there were 3 PHAs in Alaska, you'd start with the first one and then go to the second one. And then within each PHA, it lists by project, and then it gives a summary result at the top line for each PHA, for the whole PHA. So in this case, what are the summary results that we give you? We say, okay, well, how many units are at that particular project? What's the RAD rent per unit per month? Now, again, a caution on the RAD rent. The RAD rents are sensitive to a couple things. They're sensitive to did you choose PBRA or PBV, because there's a little bit different rent caps in the PBV versus PBRA program. And I think what we did was we just because this is a simple estimating tool, we assumed everyone was converting to PBRA. That may not be the case. The rent caps in PBRA are a little bit more generous than they are in PBV. Then we take the operating expense per unit per annum, and what this is based on whatever value you put in the global assumption. If you decided to use 95% of formula expenses, then that's the figure. If it's 80% of formula expenses, whatever percentage you use, then it will tell you what the dollar value is. Alaska just happens to be a PHA with a very high formula expenses, so even though I think the starting assumption was 85%, you can still see that those numbers relative to others across the country is still a pretty high per unit per annum figure. Then column G says, from the base pro forma that we have, what would the debt service per unit per annum be? And then if the debt service is that, it calculates what's the value of the property based on an NOI approach. So it's a capitalization. It takes whatever cap rate they use, divides the NOI by the cap rate, and it gives you a value based on that. And then the next two columns, if you can show a little bit higher up, you can see we're missing, there you go. Then the next two columns are simply what's the maximum supportable first mortgage. So that maximum supportable first mortgage for the Alaska Housing Authority, based on the previous assumptions, are $70,000 per unit, or about 88 or 89 million if they converted all of it to RAD. But even though it just happens to be the first PHA in line because it's alphabetical, it also seems like a pretty good deal from this end in the case of Alaska. So Alaska, if you're on the line, I hope you're sort of paying attention here. And then the last column, K, is just information purposes. If the PHA sees that the first mortgage amounts aren't going to be adequate to, or whoever's doing the analysis, adequate to do to meet your needs, then the question is, from our geocoding, does it appear that the project is in a qualified census tract or a difficult development area that are important for tax credit sort of sizing purposes? So that's what the summary data shows. And again, lists by all public housing projects, by PHA, by state, and by PHA code, and then by project. And then again, if we can go to the assumptions page again, and instead of, rather than doing blank, and we instead want to do WY015, let's click that one, and then we hit over to the right, so to update the view. Now we go to the results tab, and now we just want to look at that PHA, and that PHA has one project, which is the Buffalo, in Buffalo, Wyoming. It's got one project. Now, as a separate issue, why we ever got in the business of having 30 units, for a project or a PHA, but God bless them for running a 30-unit PHA. And so in this case, this PHA just shows you that. Now, if you want to go back to the assumptions page and say, okay, now that I've looked at that particular one, but I really want to see all of them, I can just go back and click blank, and it will repopulate the results, and it will show you that it's working, and then it goes back and it shows you all the PHAs nationwide. Let's also just go to the assumptions page for a minute. So again, we can show what would happen for if you just change any one of these assumptions. If, for example, your other income was not $120 per annum, but was more like $500, then you can enter it in, and if you went back to the results page, you'd suddenly see that the amount of debt that this project could generate has gone up. Or for the number was about 78 or 80 million, I forget what the number was, but now it's sort of gone up substantially in the case of Alaska. So that is our summary tool. Jay, are you on the line?
I am, yes.
Great. So Jay, anything you want to add on sort of the features of this?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. The only thing is, if there's any questions, just very similar to the inventory tool, is the blue question marks there will give you some more detailed information. If you hover over them, there's notes in them. So if you hover over them, they'll give you more information about the particular value there. And then also on the results tab, on each of the column headings, it gives you more results. And incidentally, too, any of the items here in green can be overwritten. So if you say, if the PIC data says, well, this is 20 units, and you say, well, actually, the PIC data is inaccurate, I've got 22 units in that one, or if through a RAD conversion you want to upgrade the unit counts and change it to 22 units, you can change that there and look at that. Same with the rent or the operating expenses. So you can you can change. Go ahead.
So Leanne, we did that for the 22. Just show the values for a moment over to the right for the debt. So let's change the RAD rent. Let's say it was not $949 for that first project, but it's say $1,200. And what we should see is the first mortgage go up. So let's see, hit return.
Yeah, it did.
What?
Yep.
It did. Okay, great. So so you can just go right into there, and then if you've done that enough that you forget sort of which ones you entered and which ones are originals, you can just go back to the assumptions page and click on restore all the default assumptions, and it goes back to the original data.
Yep.
All right. So so again, just a nice nifty tool that just helps PHAs, field offices, staff, consultants, lenders, whatever, who sort of want to take a more global look at the inventory. Here's a sort of a quick and dirty. And because it's a quick and dirty, it doesn't have all the functionality and the features that you can do under the inventory tool, which allows you to dig much deeper. And so if you're doing really project planning, then we refer you back to the inventory tool, which, again, we'll go over next week with. But this is just a great quick overview for some of the values and stuff. Okay. So we'll go ahead and open the line, but either if anybody has any questions about the new tool that we just posted on that we just featured, or if anyone has other questions just on their application process. So we've got one. We've got Jim Walker. So Jim, go ahead.
You've tried to explain this to me before, but I'm still unclear. When you talk about formula expenses,
yep,
that's sort of what we, based on our funding, what we think the expenses, the maximum yep. expenses would be. I guess my question is, if I go over and look at a PHA's actual expenses, which you've showed me how to do, if their expenses are more than their formula expenses, is there a way that it can't mean that project doesn't cash flow currently?
Right. Okay, so great question. Thanks, Jim. And I have done this no, I'm not kidding. So Jim's been a great promoter of RAD throughout the Southeast, and Henry Nelson and the other whole team there in the Montgomery office. So for everyone to just understand, when we say under the operating expense assumption line, which says operating expenses, percentage of operating, so if you just click in the middle of there, you see that line where it says 85%. So what does that represent? That represents housing authorities get something, their funding comes to them under a formula, and the formula goes back to the Harvard cost study from 2003, 2004, and which it went out and looked at what does it cost multifamily to run real estate, and it did a big regression model, and it said, and now we assign for every project in the country has essentially a number that is considered its formula expense. In other words, this is what, through a statistical model, is what that project should cost to operate. And then the way housing authorities get their operating funding is that you sort of add up those formula expenses, you subtract the tenant rent, and the difference should be subsidy. And it's either whether the Congress gives us 100% of subsidy or 90% of subsidy, whatever. So it's formula based, and it's supposed to represent through a statistical model what others in multifamily would be spending if they were nonprofit owners, because there's a differential. For-profit owners are more efficient in running their properties than nonprofits, so that it assumes the cost structure of a nonprofit. Okay, so when you click this line item and you say 85% or 95%, it doesn't represent what they're actually spending today. It could be anything. It could be a higher, it could be a lower number what they're actually spending. To know what they're actually spending, either ask the PHA, which should know, or PHAs have been required for the past 5 or so years to submit project-level financial statements. So field offices and others, if you want to know sort of what they're actually spending, it's from the annual financial statements, or what we call in public housing the FDS, Financial Data Schedule, that they submit every year. So this number is sort of what is the percentage of the formula we give them that we sort of, can you operate if theoretically this cost study said this is what it cost in this market to operate based on a nonprofit structure. Could you do better under RAD because either you are running now a more simpler program, it's not with all the rules that public housing has. Maybe the property gets renovated, so there should be efficiency savings as a result of that. So this is just one way, one proxy of trying to come up with, well, what do I think it should cost to run the properties? And if that number is sort of not doesn't jibe, so Leanne, if we can go to the results page again, you can go in. It's a little clunkier on this tool, but you can go in the operating expense column and say, well, the heck with what HUD gives me as a formula. I know that it costs $7,500 per unit per year in this market to run a family low-rise, or I know it costs $6,500 a year to run a senior high-rise, right? That different operators have a sense of what it should cost to run different types of properties. And right, you can either use that, or again, these are sort of global worksheets, but if a PHA today is spending more than this amount, that more than either the formula or the percentage of the formula that was sort of used for estimating purposes, then you need to look hard at that to say either that PHA is doing a yeoman's job because that formula is wrong and that the formula should have been higher, or uh-oh, we got a problem. they're already spending more than the formula gives. It's going to be really hard for this project to pencil out, and either means they're a bad candidate for conversion, or it means, consistent with conversion, that somehow there's going to have to be some reorganizing, restructuring, sort of improving of sort of the cost sort of structure of that property. So, Jim, does that help?
No, that helps. Just one other quick question on the
Sure.
formula expenses. Is it, in terms of what the PHA actually, so if we're talking 2012 where we were at 95%,
Yep.
is that, so if I put in 95%, is that going to give me 95%, is that going to be the same as what I got in 2012?
Yeah, pretty much. There's one or two things that we sort of exclude from this number, which I'll go to, and we may lose some people in the detail, but more or less, yes, that's that number. What we don't include here is if a PHA is getting something in public housing called asset repositioning fee.
Sure.
That's a one-time fee, and it's sort of for a phased-out project, so we exclude that. The other very important thing to remember is that this number, just for the purposes of putting in an estimate, it says this is 95% of your formal expenses. Today in public housing, for agencies who are stop-loss agencies, so agencies that had been sort of net asset management ahead of the curve, and therefore they were projected to lose funding when we converted to asset management because their funding was considered high relative to the study. If they were able to meet asset management, we stopped their losses, and we kept them at the higher funding level. This does not include that so-called bump up. It is what the formula says you should have, but you may be getting a little bit more under the line item of the operating fund called transition funding. So this number does not include, for those agencies who are stop-loss agencies, the transition funding. What this is supposed to represent is saying, yeah, this is still just the model for those agencies who are stop-loss. It doesn't include the additional value that they get because they were able to stop their losses.
Thanks.
Yep.
That helps.
We're going to go and see if there's someone else who's got a call. So we've got like Kyla Baylor. Kyla? Kyla, do you have a question for us?
Can you hear me? Sorry, I had you on mute.
Sure.
Sorry.
You're good.
I'm from the Montgomery County Housing Authority in Pennsylvania, and we're considering this, but I'm wondering, has anybody used this RAD tool and did not couple it with a loan or with a mortgage or with any
Sure.
rehab work?
All right. So the question is, maybe try to rephrase it. I may have a property that's in really good shape, and maybe you've got an R or stimulant grant, or you've just been doing a great job sitting on that property for a couple of years, and I don't need to take out a loan, and I don't need to do tax credits. Will HUD still let me convert? And the answer is yes. So there's no requirement under RAD for you to do a level of any particular level of rehab. So all we require is that every property that gets an award, after it gets an award, we require a physical condition assessment. And if the PCA comes back and says, well, actually you do have $3,000 or $4,000 per unit worth of work to do, we simply require you to do whatever the PCA reasonably says you have to do. But if the PCA comes back and says, no, that property really is in great shape, then if you happen to have a RAD rent of $600 and your operating and other expenses are only $450, and so therefore your NOI is $100, $150, and you don't need to take on any debt, then great, that's $150 in cash flow, and lots of people, I'd say 20% of PHAs have applied are what we call no debt models that didn't take out any capital.
And if there is if there is work that you need to do, you don't necessarily have to take out debt. You might have operating reserves associated with the property. You can use capital funds. There are other sources that you can use to plug smaller holes.
And may I just push that one little step further?
Sure.
In the event that you are a PHA that a particular property does need work, but it's not going to pencil out now, or we wanted to get in to get the rent reservation by the end of December, but the deal timing doesn't quite work, can that be reserved and then done at a later date?
So let's say you have two projects, and one pencils out right now, and you're still trying to figure out how I'm going to make the second one work. You haven't quite sort of understood the 4% game, or you're trying to sort of negotiate. So you can give us an application for one, and then at the same time ask for a portfolio award where we say, you define the size of the portfolio. If your portfolio is 2 projects, then we say as long as you give us half or 1 project for a real application now, you'll have another 365 days to give us the application for the second. By the time you give us an application, whether in the first or in the second stage, that application more or less has to pencil out. It has to sort of show your best estimate to show that this project is feasible. So if you need more time planning for that second project, then yeah, submit for the one that you're good for and put in the portfolio to give you another 365 days to plan for the second.
Thank you.
Sure. We got Doug Moritz. Doug, how are you?
Hi, Greg. I'm fine. Thank you for taking my call. What connection do the cuts in September and October operating subsidies have on the on our RAD, or will they have on our RAD application, if any?
So it shouldn't, because what we're doing is we're saying that we're using the 2012 funding levels with the so-called operating adjustment allocation put back in. So that's the equivalent of saying you were funded at 95% of the operating subsidy once you throw the allocation back in. So we're going back to the 2012. And what happens this year in terms of what your RAD contract rents will be for 2014, 15, and 16 doesn't make a difference. We know they're going to be that amount, which we have today in the assessment tool. So it doesn't have really any impact on it.
All right, thank you.
Sure. We got Marcia Davis. Marcia?
Hi, can you hear us, Greg?
Yes.
This is actually Lee Alford and Marcia Davis here from RRHA in Richmond.
Okay, great.
Just quick question, is the RAD rents that you're showing, are those gross or net? In other words, are they taking into account a utility allowance?
Right, so great question. What it is it reflects whatever the current utility combination is at your property. So if you have a project paid utility, then let's take the case of Alaska 001 we have on the screen, and the RAD rent PUM for the very first property called Wrangell is $949. If that is an all project paid utilities, then essentially the contract rent is the same as the gross rent. But let's say that, and therefore it represents all the subsidy and all the rent that we get for that property. But if that particular property years ago, if the Alaska Housing Finance Agency realized that energy costs are huge and they want to get it off their books and make the residents more sort of accountable for the utilities, and so therefore today they might have a $200 utility allowance for that property, then the $949 really is the contract rent for the property, but there's another $200 that's utility allowance. So the gross rent would be $1149. So it all depends. You have to know what your own utility arrangements are, and both the application and the inventory tool can actually give you a sense of that, because you can find on both of those tools what the gross utility allowance is for the property, and also there's data on the last 3 years of financial statements, knowing you can see whether the project has a big utility bill or no utility bill. That is always the contract rent. It may sometimes be the gross rent if it's a project paid utilities, but you just have to know what your own arrangements are.
Very good. Thank you.
Sure. Okay. So we're going to do Joe Murphy. Joe?
Yes, just a question on the RAD rent. Because we're getting 95% in 2012, and we're not going to implement until, I guess, 2014 if we're approved, would we get the CFA adjustment or inflation adjustment for 2013?
No, so what we do is we don't give any adjustment in 2013. The reason we don't is because essentially if we gave you an adjustment in 2013, you'd actually be getting more funding than what other PHAs got in 2013. So we sort of said, really what we're doing is we decided to settle on the 2012 because that was sort of what the department had planned to sort of essentially fund PHAs at before all this craziness with the sequester and all that stuff came in, and the operating fund allocation adjustment. So there's no adjustment in 2013, but there is adjustment in 2014 forward. So if you've closed in 2013, you'll get the 2012 level, and your first OCAF will be in 14. If you don't close in 13 and you close for the first time in 2014, you still get an inflation adjustment at the time in which you close. So everyone will still get an adjustment in 2014, whether they closed in 2013 or they close in 2014. And if I don't close, if I've got a project that's a 9% tax credit that takes a while to sort of get built out, and I'm actually, or actually to close the deal, and I'm actually not closing 2015, when 15 comes around, you'll have 2 years of adjustments by the time you close.
All right, great, thanks.
Sure.
Yeah, and the other question, real quick, is with once you do the P&A, and if there is no requirement for capital improvement, we would still be able to access the equity on the property, correct?
Oh yeah, it's all yours. It's sort of the way we look at it as, let's say you have a 100-unit property, is we're good if you make us whole for 100 units. We don't care where you put the units. I mean, other than meeting fair housing requirements, we don't care if you rehab it. We don't care if you do new construction, and we don't care if those rents generate surplus cash, and we don't care if that land has enormous value associated with it. And if you're able to sort of take advantage of the value or the equity in the project to meet your larger mission purposes, good for you. So we're trying to do this like other sort of owners of affordable housing, give as much sort of freedom as possible. So yeah, we will remove the declaration of trust, and you'll be able to take advantage of the equity in that project.
Very good, thank you.
Sure. We'll just see if there's other questions here. We're checking the queue.
We have a written one.
We have a written one, okay.
Neil Gasson asks, if an authority has 3 properties at 15 units each, and one of the properties needs to be torn down, when you reconstruct, are you able to put more units back at the property, like 6 units? Okay, so can you put more back? Let's say you start with 150, but there's 5 pads, 3 pads of 50 units each, and you find some way to build 160 units. So on the one hand, the answer is, as many units as you want to build, we're fine. On the other hand, as many units as will be Section 8 RAD will only be the 150 you started with. We can't grow the program through this, but if you can introduce, because of whatever means, the value of the property, whatever, build more units, and you have some other way to either subsidize them or you have a way to make them market, we're happy with that. But you won't be able to get more subsidized units than when you started. Does that work for you? Okay. We have Terry Green. Terry, go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now you're good.
Okay. Can you help me to understand the administrative fees the Housing Authority receives under RAD, both project-based vouchers and project-based rental assistance?
Sure.
It seems to be sort of a critical issue for these housing authorities in terms of providing an incentive for them to enter into the program.
Okay. I'll start, and Will may add to this. So you have these 2 choices. You can go to project-based rental assistance or multifamily housing or project-based vouchers. So if you go to project-based rental assistance, you have to ask, okay, who's the contract administrator? And the contract administrator, when you convert to project-based rental assistance, is HUD generally has 1 contract administrator for each state, I think 2 in California, and they're called performance-based contract administrators, or PBCAs. And HUD pays them a fee, and that fee is about $250 million a year across the entire PBCA inventory is what HUD pays. And so when a contract converts to PBRA, then if it was a normal multifamily project, it would be signed to a PBCA, and HUD would pay that PBCA because they've just added to their inventory. What you just have to know is that a RAD project does not have to pay for that admin fee. But that admin fee that goes to pay the PBCA is not funded out of the rents or the funding that the project currently gets. It's just part of HUD's larger responsibility, so therefore it's in HUD's budget, and we'll cover it. Now, as an aside, the Office of Housing has decided for at least the next couple of years it won't actually assign these units to PBCAs. It will do the oversight itself, only because this is sort of a new special inventory, and until we get the kinks worked out, that probably over time we'll assign it to PBCAs, but not immediately. The HUD field staff will be responsible for doing the contract administration. So that's if you move to PBRA. If you move to PBD, you have to ask the same question. Well, who's the contract administrator? It's not a PBCA like in multifamily housing. It's the Section 8 voucher agency, and they also get a paid a fee. So we felt for equity purposes we would treat this the same. If you had gone to PBRA, there would have been a contract administrator, and HUD would have paid a fee. So if you go to PBV, there's also contract administrator, which is the voucher agency for which the units will be added to their ACC, and they will earn the normal admin fee that you earn whenever you get a voucher. And it's not paid. That admin fee does not have to come out of the current funding for the project. So PHAs that end up going to PBV, whether they have a voucher program and they'll be the contract administrator, or they don't have a voucher program and some other sister agency is going to be the contract administrator, they will earn a new admin fee for all those units that convert from public housing to RAD. Does that help you?
So if they go PBV, they get a fee.
Yep.
If they're the agency.
Because they're the contract administrator.
If they have a voucher program.
Right.
And they have a voucher program. Okay. And this fee tends to be how much?
Well, so it varies by market. I think nationally it's averages about $60 per unit per month. But it can be as high as, depending on proration, because the admin fees have been prorated pretty deeply the last couple of years. But the pre-prorated rate is about $80 to $100 per unit per month in areas of the Northeast and areas of California, and it's as low as $45 a month in areas of Kansas and Indianapolis and places like that. So the formula is heavily weighted for admin fees to market rents, and so those places with very high market rents tend to get higher admin fees. But HUD's also going through this larger study of setting admin fees. The study's going to take a couple of years, but in the voucher program, so that may change, but at least for the next several years, that's what it is. And HUD publishes a schedule of these admin fees every year through the voucher program. You can find it on the voucher program's website.
Oh, okay.
Okay, good. Let's see if there's other people who've got a question to ask. We do. We have Joe Murphy. Joe, go back in.
Yes, thanks. With the PBV admin fee, is it going to be a lower fee paid to the Section 8 voucher program?
No, it's the same admin fee. Today there's no difference for a PHA that has regular vouchers or is doing project-based vouchers. The admin fee is the same. So we didn't just set any different schedule under RAD for the admin fee they'll get.
Great, thanks.
Good. Hey, Jim, you got another call? Another question?
Yes, just going back to the funding streams, I'm getting questions about if a place converts, and whether it's 2013, but let's say, or 2014, once they convert over, are they going to be part of HUD's, are they part of the, if they do PBRA,
yeah.
Are they part of that funding pool?
Yes,
you know, in the sense of that Congress, when HUD goes to Congress, multifamily will be asking for that much more money, as opposed to an interfund transfer where public housing is reimbursing multifamily for
right.
that.
Yep. So it takes about a year for it to work through the system. So in the very first year that someone converts, they may have converted in November, which is only a month or two left in the year. They're actually staying in the public housing program for the funding purposes and just using whatever had been appropriated for that project for the balance of the year until they get through the year. Then in the second year, that what happens is there wasn't enough time to give a heads up to the Congress to say, well, this is how many units actually converted this year, and it would sort of screw up the budgeting system to try to estimate that, and the estimates would be wrong and whatnot. So in year two, any project that converted the previous year, that the amount they need that year for conversion, if let's say we converted 5,000 units, and that's, you know, $50 or $60 million, whatever the number is, then that immediately gets transferred out of the appropriation that was just made for public housing, and that money gets moved over to multifamily. Say they all moved over to PBRA, that goes over to multifamily, and it gets paid for out of the multifamily account now. The multifamily account goes up by $50 million. The public housing account goes down by $50 million, and it gets funded. And then because it was funded that year through that transfer, it is now in the multifamily baseline. And so then by the third year, HUD has enough knowledge about what units were actually in that the PBR baseline, and then they ask for an appropriation from the Congress that includes the units that have been converted back in the first year. So it takes a little bit to roll through, but ultimately, yes, it is part of the multifamily baseline. It doesn't every year get funded out of the public housing account. It gets moved over to the multifamily account.
And there's no further authorizing legislation that's needed to allow that to happen.
Yeah, that's it. It's just it's in there, and it's indistinguishable from any other multifamily property.
Okay.
Good. Thanks, Jim. We got Kyla there again. Kyla?
Hi. A couple follow-ups from what I just heard. With respect to the admin fee, if you go the project-based voucher route, I just wanted to clarify, that is separate from a management fee if you manage the property.
Absolutely, right. You manage the property, you get a management fee, you may get cash flow, you may get other stuff, but yeah, yes.
Okay, and then the other follow-up question had to do with the capital needs assessment. Are you looking for a certain number of years to be addressed in that capital needs assessment, or is it, for example, if you do a 20-year capital needs assessment, are you just looking for us to make the repairs for the first 5 years, or is it a full 20-year rehab?
So we'll look at it over 20 years, and the contractor will come back and say, here's what you have to do now.
Exactly.
Shot. And they'll say, everything else, they'll figure out how much you need to do in year 2 and 4 and 10 and 15,
right.
And that then gets sized to create a replacement reserve account. And say, in order to meet all those long-term needs, you need to put aside 300, 400, 500, 1,000 per unit per month to meet your replacement reserve needs, so that when that roof does go in year 15, you actually have funds to do it. So that's how they'll do it.
Okay, so the initial rehab takes care of the immediate needs, and then we size the replacement reserve accordingly.
Yep.
Okay.
You could, of course, choose to do more than just what shows up as the immediate needs. A lot of folks doing tax credits will do the first 10 or 15 years of work now, and then have lower needs over time.
Yep, understood. And the last question I had was about the equity question that somebody asked, taking advantage of the full equity of the property. Did I hear you say that you can actually transfer the vouchers so long as we're giving you a one-for-one?
Right. So we call that transfer of assistance, and so you're not stuck with the property. There's a number of PHAs that are, they might have a piece of property that's worth some value, even though it's in pretty bad shape now, and it makes sense to them to say, well, I'll sell the property, I'll take the proceeds, and I'll go build the housing elsewhere for. I can now do a new unit as opposed to a rehab unit, and I may even have some left over at the end of the day. So. Yeah, we're completely indifferent from the RAD program about whether you do new construction or rehab, or whether you buy a new piece of property, acquire a new piece of property, build it from the ground up, as long as you give us back the same number of units.
And I thought I had read that could only be done after 10 years. Did I misinterpret something?
No,
be done immediately?
That's just once you give us the deal, we don't want to see nilly-willy changes, for a while. But no, at the time of conversion, no, absolutely. You tell us where you want to put the subsidy, and we're fine.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Terry, you have a follow-up question?
It's not a follow-up. It's a new question.
Okay.
On mixed finance deals, is there sort of some conventional wisdom about how a decision to bring a mixed finance deal through RAD, who has to sign off on that, or does it depend on the individual partnership agreements and all that?
In order to submit an application for a current public housing mixed finance deal, both the housing authority and the partnership need to sign off on making the decision to convert. So it has to be joint.
So if you've got a mixed finance deal, does the partner, if there is a partner in the deal, does the partner basically have a veto right? Is that what you're saying?
Yep.
Okay.
The application, one of the attachments in the application, one of the worksheets is called I think a mixed finance affidavit, which is just a short, 8 lines that really is just for the partnership to sign off. All parties need to be complicit.
And then what that means is, if both parties have a sign, is it's very likely going to be a good negotiation. Which is a lot of mixed finance projects today don't get the full operating and capital funds that project actually generates for the agency. So the RAD contract rent really does. Let's say it's $800 is the RAD contract rent. That's how much the subsidy the agency generates today. But you might be getting 600, which is hypothetical. And so, but boy, that project could really work at 700 or 800, as opposed to the 600. And so that's what the project, will get. The PHA may come back and say, okay, I see you, developer, would like to convert to RAD, but I'm using that other $200 PUM today, and for whatever reason I'm using it for, and I might negotiate with you that if the RAD contract is 800, maybe I'll charge you a higher lease payment for the property going forward to recoup some of that. But it's all going to be a negotiation, and depending on what's happening with the project, depends on sort of how motivated both sides are to come up with a deal.
All right. And then how about in terms of procuring a developer and things like that? I can't imagine the mixed finance partner would be interested in having some new developer coming in and bringing it through RAD.
But they don't have to. So there's no requirement for a change of ownership for mixed finance. We've got mixed finance projects that are applying under RAD where simply they're just all they're going to do is change out the Section 9 subsidy for Section 8 subsidy, and it's still going to be the same ownership entity, and it's just simply getting out of the public housing regulatory and operating agreement.
So they don't have to go through any procurement or anything?
Nope. All you're doing is you're offering them a change of subsidy.
Wow.
That's what we think.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Good. I've got Joe Murphy. Joe, got a question?
Hey, sorry, I'm asking so many questions here. With regard to the properties that are being converted, will they be retained under the ownership of the local PHA, or can we basically create a new entity to hold that property in title?
So most people will create a new entity to hold the title. So it depends on sort of what the motivations and whatnot of the PHA is. If it's going back to one of the earlier calls, there are questions that someone asked about, well, what if I have a property that doesn't need any work? If you don't need any work, therefore you don't need a loan, then there's nothing that's being pushed from the lender side requiring you to set up a single asset entity. So you could still just own it as the PHA outright. But once you start introducing any loans or equity tax credits into the equation, then those lenders or investors are going to want you to create a single asset entity. And when you set that up, you can either be a nonprofit affiliate or instrumentality of the PHA. It could be any other nonprofit. It could be any other public body. So we don't control who is the ultimate ownership entity for here. It's any one of those options, and it can also be a for-profit, but only in the case of when you're raising tax credits. The only entity you can't give it to is just a straight for-profit if it's not involved in tax credits. But it's purely up to the PHA to decide what ownership arrangement it wants, whether continue to own it itself, put it under a nonprofit of its own, give it to some other nonprofit, other public body, or whatnot.
Great, thanks. And then secondly, we talked about the one-for-one replacement with the voucher. If I have a property that has like 400 units and I redevelop it, and let's say I redevelop it for only 300 units, can I still take those additional 100 units and move them to another piece of property under that RAD rent for that property?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Good, sure. Hey, Jim, you got another question?
Yeah, just a quick one. It came up when you were talking about the sort of repositioning. I understand it's easy at the beginning, but at least in discussions with multifamily at a meeting we had with them there, the issue came up of what happens if we want to reposition this property 10 years later. And basically multifamily said unless it's a catastrophe, you'd have to have a great reason for us to be willing to do that, because you can't come and say the property is not viable. We already agreed it's viable for 20 years.
Yeah, so we have a language that says if it's in the best interest of the residents and the project after 10 years, if you want to move it. So if the project, the neighborhood changed, and you want to therefore move the subsidy somewhere else, then that would be perfectly understandable. If somehow that you had an opportunity to raise an enormous amount of capital that would sort of allow you to have a better product somewhere by moving it, that might also be. Or
if the deal were failing.
Yeah.
15 years.
Right.
Move the assistance to someplace where it'll work.
Yeah. So there's a very small window in today's multifamily housing programs where you can transfer the assistance. RAD is more liberal than that.
Okay.
So you have more opportunities to do it than a traditional multifamily owner.
Got it.
Good. Thanks, Jim. Okay, we're going to see if we see anybody else. And no written comments, Leanne, either? Okay, we're just going through the written comments.
For those who've written comments in, it would be really helpful if you could raise your hands and do it out loud. Just makes it a lot easier for us to see them.
So Zach Fowler, Zach, go ahead.
Hi. So if we have public housing units that are offline, like HUD-approved units for non-self-sufficiency, let's say,
yeah.
Those aren't included, I noticed, in the RAD inventory assessment tool in our PIC data count. Are those units still counted, though, when we do the conversion?
So if those units are in PIC, and it may simply be an error on the inventory assessment tool or in the application that they're not included there. But if they are in PIC today, they are eligible to convert, and we will fund them once converted if they're, for example, not getting operating subsidy today.
Okay, but I mean, but if right now their status is offline as a non-dwelling unit, but I mean they're still a unit, but they're being used for something else right now. There's nothing to stop us then from still putting that in and converting
yeah.
them.
If you plan to use that as a dwelling unit post-conversion.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. Margaret, Marianne, how are you, Margaret? Oh, not an audio.
So we've got a written question.
Okay, we got a written question.
Yeah, because she's asking if we have a property/amp that does not show up in the RAD inventory tool and thus doesn't have a RAD rent. It was added to the federal public housing program in the summer of 2012. How do we correct this so we can include it in a RAD application?
Okay, so
she's screwed, right?
It's come up a few times with the data that we pulled for the application and the inventory assessment tool was sometime in mid-2012. So for projects that have come online since then, we essentially need to create an application for you. So send us a note to rad@hud.gov, tell us the PIC number, and if possible, attach your latest approved operating subsidy form, the 52723. Again, it's the 52723, and then we can construct an application for you, or at least, at the very least, tell you what the rents would be so you can assess whether you want to convert the property.
Thanks, Margaret. Thanks, Will. Next question, Eric? Doesn't have audio. All right. Let's see. And we're just looking to see who's raised their hand. Nothing?
John. Oh.
Okay, looks like there's no one else has their hand raised, and we think we took care of the written questions the best we could.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
good. All right. So, all right, we're going we'll say that's the end of today's call. Keep it short and sweet. Stay tuned next week when we preview the. Actually, we got one last caller in, Cal Ross. Cal, you want to give us a question?
No idea.
Cal, are you on? Maybe on mute.
Yeah.
All right, sorry, Cal.
Yeah, we sent you a
there you go.
Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you now. Go ahead.
Okay. We sent the question as it always gets back to the utility charges in public housing. It's not allowed for air conditioning reimbursement and operating subsidy, but in project-based rental assistance programs, air conditioning is allowed. How does that enter into the equation for calculating the subsidy?
Yeah, this question has come up before, and it's sort of on our list to sort of clarify. So if you can, Cal, I want to hold this till next week, and we'll come up and talk about that one next week, all right?
Greg, it works for us.
Okay, thanks, Cal.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it for today. Thanks, everybody. Sign on next week because I think you'll like the revisions we've made to the inventory tool. And otherwise, again, thanks to everybody. Thanks to Jay and Will and Leanne and Robert here at headquarters. And we'll likely talk again next Thursday. Thank you.